Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. Whispering Fog. I had always loved the fog. It blanketed the world in a soft, ethereal haze, transforming the ordinary into something mysterious and unknown. But that changed one fateful evening, when the fog outside my window became something far more sinister. It started as a typical autumn night. The air was crisp, and the fog rolled in thick, cloaking the town in a ghostly shroud. I was sitting in my study, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to lose myself in a book. The fog pressed against the window, swirling in hypnotic patterns. As I glanced up, my heart skipped a beat. Words were forming in the mist, coalescing into a message that sent a chill down my spine. Let me in. I stared, transfixed, as the words hung in the air, refusing to dissipate. I shook my head, convinced it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But then I heard it, a voice, soft and pleading, matching the message in the fog. It was a voice I knew all too well, one that I hadn't heard in years. It was the voice of my deceased spouse, Emily. Let me in, the voice repeated, clear and unmistakable. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to make sense of what I was experiencing. Emily had been gone for 5 years, taken from me in a tragic accident. The grief had nearly consumed me, but I had managed to rebuild my life, piece by painful piece. Now, hearing her voice again, I felt the old wounds tearing open. I stood and approached the window, my hands trembling. Emily? I whispered, my breath fogging up the glass. There was no response, just the swirling mist and the echo of her voice in my mind. I turned away, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. But the fog continued to press against the window, insistent and unrelenting. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The voice had been so real, so vivid. Could it have been a dream? A hallucination brought on by too much whiskey and too little sleep? I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than that, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I awoke to find the fog had lifted, but the sense of unease lingered. I went about my day in a daze, the memory of Emily's voice haunting my every thought. As night fell, the fog returned, thicker than ever. I sat in the living room, watching it swirl outside the window, half expecting the message to reappear. And it did. Let me in, the words formed again, more clearly this time. The voice followed, more insistent, more desperate. Please, let me in. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This was no trick of the light, no figment of my imagination. Emily's voice was real, and it was coming from the fog. I paced the room, my mind racing. What could it mean? Was Emily trapped somewhere, trying to reach out to me? Or was this something darker, something that wore her voice like a mask? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to find out. Summoning all my courage, I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The fog enveloped me, cold and clammy against my skin. I strained to see through the thick haze, calling out into the darkness. Emily? Are you there? My voice sounded small and uncertain, swallowed by the fog. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, out of the mist, came the reply. I'm here, Emily's voice echoed, closer now. Please, let me in. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, disorienting me. I turned in circles, trying to pinpoint its source, but the fog was too thick, too oppressive. Panic set in as I realized how lost I was. The familiar landscape of my front yard had vanished, replaced by an endless sea of white. I stumbled forward, desperate to find my way back. But no matter which direction I turned, the voice followed, growing louder, more insistent. Let me in. Please, let me in. Finally, I broke through the fog, finding myself back at the front door. I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house was eerily silent, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. Emily's voice had fallen silent, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it returned. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. For days, I was tormented by Emily's voice. Each night, the fog rolled in thicker, the messages in the mist growing more desperate and insistent. "Let me in," it pleaded, a ghostly refrain that echoed in my mind. My once peaceful home had become a place of dread, the fog a constant, malevolent presence. I tried to ignore it, to go about my daily routine, but it was impossible. Emily's voice haunted me, a reminder of a past I couldn't escape. I barely slept, my dreams filled with fog and whispers. During the day, I felt her presence everywhere, as if she was watching me from the shadows. Desperate for answers, I decided to visit the old house we had lived in before her death. It had been abandoned since the accident, left to decay and rot. The memories of our time there were bittersweet, a mix of happiness and sorrow. I hoped that returning might offer some clue, some way to understand what was happening. The house stood at the edge of town, shrouded in fog. As I approached, the familiar sense of unease washed over me. The windows were broken, the once vibrant garden overgrown with weeds. I pushed open the creaking front door and stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. I wandered through the empty rooms, memories flooding back with every step. Our laughter, our arguments, the love we had shared, all seemed to echo in the silence. I felt her presence more strongly here, as if she was just out of sight, watching me. I made my way to the attic, the place where we had stored all our keepsakes and mementos. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and forgotten treasures. I rummaged through the boxes, looking for anything that might explain the voice in the fog. At the bottom of one box, I found an old journal, Emily's journal. My hands trembled as I opened it, the pages yellowed with age. The entries were a window into her thoughts, her fears, and her dreams. I read through them, my heart aching with each word. Near the end, I found an entry that caught my eye. It was dated just days before the accident. Emily had written about strange dreams, of a voice calling to her from the fog. She had felt a presence, something dark and malevolent, lurking just beyond her vision. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me. Emily had known about the fog, had felt its pull even before her death. I continued reading, the final entry sending a chill down my spine. "I hear it every night now," she had written. "The voice in the fog. It wants me to let it in. I don't know how much longer I can resist." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. Emily had been haunted by the same voice, the same fog. Had it played a part in her death? The thought was too terrible to contemplate. I knew then that I had to confront the fog, to find out what it wanted and put an end to its torment. That night, I returned home, my resolve steeled. The fog was thicker than ever, pressing against the windows like a living thing. I stood in the living room, staring out into the swirling mist. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the voice returned, more insistent than ever. "Let me in," it pleaded. "Please, let me in." The fog swirled, forming words again. "Help me." "Help you?" I repeated, bewildered. "How? What do you need?" The reply was immediate, the voice filled with desperation. "Find me. Bring me back." The fog pressed closer, the words almost tangible. "I need you." I realized then that the fog wasn't just a manifestation of Emily's spirit. It was something more, something darker, using her voice to manipulate me. But why? What did it want? The question swirled in my mind, as thick and impenetrable as the fog itself. I knew I had to find out. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door and stepped out into the night, the fog swallowing me whole. The voice guided me, leading me deeper into the mist, away from the safety of my home. "Let me in," it whispered. "Help me." I followed the voice, my heart pounding in my chest. The fog grew thicker, the world around me fading into nothingness. I felt a presence, dark and oppressive, closing in on me. I knew I was close, but to what, I couldn't say. The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Bring me back. Let me in. And then, through the fog, I saw it, a faint, flickering light, beckoning me forward. The flickering light grew brighter as I stumbled through the fog, my heart pounding in my chest. The oppressive darkness pressed in around me, the voice guiding me forward. Let me in. Help me, it repeated, an urgent whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, but I pressed on, driven by a desperate need for answers. As I neared the light, I realized it was coming from a lantern, hanging from the branch of a twisted, gnarled tree. The tree stood alone in a clearing, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Beneath it, partially hidden by the fog, was an old well. The stones were worn and covered in moss, the opening dark and foreboding. The voice grew louder, more insistent. Let me in. Find me. It seemed to emanate from the well, a chilling echo that reverberated through the clearing. I approached the edge, peering into the darkness. The air was thick with a sense of dread, as if the well itself was a gateway to something unspeakable. Emily? I called, my voice trembling. Are you down there? There was no response, just the cold, unyielding silence of the well. The lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I was not alone. The fog swirled around me, forming shapes and figures that seemed to dance in the periphery of my vision. Summoning all my courage, I lowered a rope into the well, securing it to the tree. The voice grew louder, almost frantic. Let me in. Please, help me. I knew I had to go down, to face whatever lay hidden in the depths. Taking a deep breath, I grasped the rope and began my descent. The air grew colder as I descended, the darkness closing in around me. The walls of the well were slick with moisture, the stones rough against my hands. The voice guided me, urging me onward. You're close. Don't stop. My heart pounded in my chest, each step taking me deeper into the unknown. Finally, I reached the bottom. The air was damp and musty, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The well was deeper than I had imagined, a cavernous space that seemed to stretch on forever. The voice was louder now, echoing off the walls. Help me. Let me in. I moved cautiously, the beam of the flashlight revealing an old, rusted door set into the stone. The door was covered in strange symbols, etched into the metal. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, the cold metal sending a shock through my system. I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The hinges creaked, the sound echoing through the chamber. Beyond the door was a small room, the air thick with an oppressive presence. In the center of the room, illuminated by the flashlight, was a mirror. The mirror was old and ornate, the glass cracked and clouded with age. As I approached, the voice grew louder, more desperate. Let me in. Please, help me. I reached out, my fingers brushing the surface of the glass. The reflection was distorted, a twisted version of reality. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow, the light blindingly bright. I stumbled back, shielding my eyes. The voice grew louder, almost a scream. Let me in. Help me. The glow intensified, filling the room with an otherworldly light. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. I lowered my hands, blinking against the darkness. The mirror was gone, replaced by a figure that looked exactly like Emily. She stood there, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing. Thank you, she whispered, her voice soft and fragile. You freed me. Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to her. Emily? Is it really you? She nodded, a sad smile on her lips. Yes, it's me. But we don't have much time. The fog, it was never just the fog. It was something darker, something that wanted to trap us both. My heart ached as I looked at her, the love of my life standing before me. What do I do? You have to destroy the source, she said, her voice trembling. The lantern. It's the key. Destroy it, and the fog will lose its power. I nodded, determination flooding through me. "I'll do it. I promise." Emily reached out, her hand cold against mine. "Be careful. It's stronger than you think." I climbed back up the rope, the sense of urgency driving me forward. The fog was thicker now, the presence more oppressive. I approached the lantern, the light flickering ominously. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed it and smashed it against the ground. The lantern shattered, the light extinguishing in an instant. The fog recoiled, the oppressive presence lifting. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, the air growing lighter. Emily's voice echoed in my mind, a final whisper of gratitude. "Thank you." As the fog dissipated, I knew that Emily was finally at peace. But as I turned to leave, I saw a shadow in the corner of my eye, a reminder that the darkness was never truly gone. In the days that followed, I thought the nightmare was finally over. The fog had lifted, the oppressive presence gone. I could feel Emily's gratitude, her spirit at peace. But the shadow that lingered in the corner of my eye haunted me, a constant reminder that something still wasn't right. One evening, I sat by the window, watching the sun set over the horizon. The world seemed normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As the sky darkened, the fog began to roll in once more, thick and ominous. My heart sank as I saw the familiar words form in the mist, "Let me in." "No," I whispered, backing away from the window. "This can't be happening again." The voice returned, more desperate than before. "Let me in. Please, let me in." It was Emily's voice, but twisted, filled with anguish and pain. I knew it wasn't her, not really. Whatever had haunted us was still out there, and it was getting stronger. Desperate for answers, I returned to the old house, determined to find the source of the darkness. The fog followed me, swirling around my feet as I made my way inside. The air was thick with decay, the house an eerie echo of its former self. I climbed the stairs to the attic, hoping to find some clue I had missed before. In the corner of the attic, where I had found Emily's journal, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A trapdoor, hidden beneath a pile of old boxes. My hands trembled as I cleared away the debris, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With a deep breath, I descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, stone chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, similar to those I had seen on the door in the well. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it, a book bound in dark leather. The book seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the air around it thick with power. I opened the book, the pages filled with incomprehensible symbols and drawings. But one page caught my eye, a detailed illustration of the lantern I had destroyed, and beneath it, a passage written in an ancient script. As I read the words, a cold realization washed over me. The lantern had been a conduit, but not the source. The true source of the darkness was the book itself. I knew what I had to do. Summoning all my courage, I grabbed the book and rushed back up the stairs. The fog pressed in around me, the voice growing louder, more frantic. "Let me in. Please, let me in." I ignored it, my focus solely on the task at hand. Back in the attic, I threw the book into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed it. The air crackled with energy, the symbols on the walls glowing brightly before fading to darkness. The fog outside the window dissipated, the voice falling silent. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of finality settling over me. I returned home, exhausted but relieved. The house was quiet, the oppressive presence gone. I knew that Emily was truly at peace now, and that whatever darkness had haunted us was finally vanquished. I sat by the window, watching the first light of dawn break over the horizon, a new day beginning. But as the morning sun cast its light over the room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, faint but unmistakable, were the words "Let me in," etched into the plaster. The shadow in the corner of my eye grew darker, more defined. I realized then that the darkness was never truly gone. It was a part of me now, a lingering presence that would always be there, waiting. And as the fog began to roll in once more, I knew that my battle was far from over. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. Watchful Eyes. It began on a dreary Saturday afternoon. Rain pattered incessantly against the windows, casting a rhythmic, hypnotic spell over the house. I had decided to tackle a long-ignored task, cleaning out the attic. Armed with a flashlight and a trash bag, I ascended the creaky wooden stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The attic was a forgotten place, a dusty repository of memories and relics long past their prime. As I rummaged through boxes of old clothes, faded photographs, and tarnished trinkets, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. Then, in the farthest corner, hidden beneath a moth-eaten blanket, I found it. A doll, its porcelain face cracked in places, stared up at me with unblinking glass eyes. It wore a tattered lace dress, yellowed with age, and its hair, once likely a lustrous blonde, was now a tangled mess. Despite its decrepit state, there was something unnervingly lifelike about it. I picked up the doll, feeling a chill run down my spine as I did. "Who put you here?" I murmured, as if expecting an answer. There was no response, of course, just the silence of the attic and the constant drumming of the rain. I decided to bring the doll downstairs, intending to clean it up and perhaps keep it as a curious antique. That night, I placed the doll on a shelf in the living room and went to bed, feeling an odd mix of unease and amusement. My sleep was restless, filled with vague, unsettling dreams of those unblinking eyes. When I woke the next morning, I found the doll had moved. It was now sitting on the coffee table, facing the couch where I had fallen asleep watching TV. "How did you get there?" I asked aloud, the sound of my voice echoing unnaturally in the empty room. I picked up the doll and returned it to the shelf, dismissing the incident as my own forgetfulness. But the feeling of being watched lingered. Over the next few days, the doll continued to move. Each time, it was in a different room, always positioned to face me. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps I was moving it in my sleep, or maybe it was a prank by a friend. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went, cold and unblinking, as if it was trying to tell me something. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I returned home to find the doll sitting in my bedroom, on my nightstand, its eyes fixed on my bed. My heart raced as I picked it up, its porcelain skin cool and smooth under my fingers. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the oppressive silence of my empty house. The final straw came a week later. I woke in the middle of the night to a sound, a soft, shuffling noise coming from the hallway. I sat up, straining to hear, my heart pounding in my chest. The noise grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, fear paralyzing me. Slowly, the door creaked open, and there it was, the doll, its glass eyes glittering in the dim light, staring directly at me. I screamed, grabbing the doll and throwing it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, 1,000 shards of porcelain scattering across the floor. Breathing heavily, I turned on the light, staring at the remains of the doll. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. From the corner of the room, a soft whisper reached my ears, barely audible but unmistakable. "You can't get rid of me." In the days that followed, I was haunted by the remnants of the shattered doll. I had swept up the pieces and disposed of them, but the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing night. It seemed as though the doll's spirit lingered, taunting me with its ethereal voice. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by restless nights filled with anxiety and dread. One evening, as I sat on the edge of my bed, exhausted and fraught with nerves, I decided to investigate the history of the house. The house had stood for over a century, a relic of another time. Perhaps the doll was a relic too, a remnant of a past resident. I went to the local library, poring over old records and archives, searching for any clue that might explain the doll's presence. I discovered that the house had once belonged to a family named the Whitmores. They had lived there in the late 1800s. Among the records, I found an old photograph of the family. And it was a little girl holding the very same doll, her expression solemn and hauntingly familiar. Her name was Emily, and according to the records, she had died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 10. As I delved deeper into the history, I learned that Emily's parents had been accused of neglect and abuse. The whispers around town at the time suggested that Emily's death had not been an accident. My heart ached for the little girl, trapped in a tragic past. But why was her doll haunting me now? What did it want? That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "Help me," they pleaded, the voice fragile and childlike. It echoed through the room, sending chills down my spine. I sat up, clutching the blankets to my chest, my eyes darting around the room. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. A cold breeze swept through the room, despite the windows being closed. The whispering grew louder, more desperate. "Find me." I knew then that I couldn't ignore it any longer. Emily's spirit was reaching out to me, seeking resolution. I had to find out what had happened to her, and perhaps, in doing so, lay her restless soul to rest. The next day, I returned to the attic, determined to uncover any hidden secrets. I searched through every box, every corner, hoping to find something that might explain Emily's fate. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I found a small, locked chest hidden beneath a loose floorboard. My hands trembled as I pried it open. Inside the chest were letters, old and yellowed with age, written in a delicate, childlike script. They were from Emily, addressed to no one in particular, detailing the horrors she had endured at the hands of her parents. My heart broke as I read her words, her fear and pain palpable in every line. The final letter ended abruptly, as if she had been interrupted. It was dated the day she died. As I held the letters, the room grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. Turning slowly, I saw her, a ghostly figure of a little girl, her eyes filled with sorrow. She pointed to the floor, where a faint outline of a trapdoor was visible beneath the dust. My pulse quickened as I realized what she was showing me. With trembling hands, I opened the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I knew I had to go down, to uncover whatever lay hidden below. Emily's spirit hovered nearby, urging me on. I took a deep breath and descended into the unknown, the air growing colder with each step. The staircase led to a small, dimly lit room that smelled of damp earth and decay. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The room was bare except for a small bed in the corner, an old wooden chair, and chains fixed to the wall. My heart sank as I realized what this place was, a prison for a helpless child. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. In the center of the room, there was a single, unmarked grave, its dirt slightly disturbed as if recently dug. The whispers began again, louder and more urgent. "Find me," Emily's voice implored. My hands shook as I picked up a nearby shovel, the metal scraping against the ground, and began to dig. With each shovelful of dirt, the air grew colder and the whispers more frantic. Finally, the shovel struck something solid. I dropped to my knees and brushed the remaining dirt away, revealing a small wooden box. I pried it open, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside was a collection of items, a lock of hair, a worn teddy bear, and a locket. The locket bore a portrait of Emily, confirming that this was indeed her final resting place. As I held the locket, the whispers ceased, replaced by a profound silence. Emily's ghost appeared again, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and ethereal. The air grew warmer, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace. But the moment was fleeting. The atmosphere shifted, growing darker and more oppressive. A deep, malevolent presence filled the room, making it hard to breathe. A guttural voice echoed through the chamber. "You should have left well enough alone." The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing thicker and more menacing. I stumbled back, clutching the locket to my chest. The presence grew stronger, suffocating in its intensity. "She was mine," the voice hissed, filled with rage and malice. I realized then that Emily's tormentor was still here, a dark spirit bound to this place. Panic set in as I searched for an escape, my flashlight flickering wildly. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows reaching out with clawed hands. I could feel the spirit's anger, a palpable force pressing down on me. "Leave her alone," I shouted, my voice echoing off the stone walls. The malevolent spirit roared in response, a sound that shook the very foundation of the house. I could see Emily's ghost, her form flickering, struggling against the dark presence. I had to do something, but what? My mind raced, grasping for any solution. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the letters. I pulled them from my pocket and began to read them aloud, my voice trembling. Emily's words filled the room, a testament to her suffering and innocence. The dark spirit recoiled, its power waning with each word. Emily's ghost grew stronger, her form solidifying as the spirit weakened. With the final letter, the dark presence let out a final, furious wail before dissipating into nothingness. The room grew still, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Emily's ghost smiled at me, her eyes filled with a bittersweet gratitude. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. She began to fade, her spirit finally at peace. I climbed back up the narrow staircase, my legs shaking with exhaustion and relief. As I emerged into the attic, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The house seemed brighter, warmer, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. I knew that Emily was free, her spirit no longer bound to this place. But as I made my way back downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. The house was silent, but the shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, the after effects of a harrowing ordeal. Then, as I reached the living room, I saw it. The doll, completely intact, sitting on the coffee table, its unblinking eyes staring directly at me. The sight of the doll sent a wave of terror crashing over me. I had destroyed it, shattered it into pieces. Yet, here it was, whole and intact, its glass eyes unblinking and accusatory. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached it, every instinct screaming at me to run. I reached out with trembling hands, lifting the doll. It felt cold, almost alive in its stillness. "Why won't you leave me alone?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something. I placed the doll back on the table and stepped back, watching it warily. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the lights flickered. A dark shadow materialized behind the doll, taking shape into a tall, menacing figure. It was the dark spirit, more powerful and angry than before. "You meddled in things you don't understand," it hissed, its voice echoing with fury. "Emily was mine, and you took her away from me." The realization hit me like a blow. The doll was a vessel, a conduit for the dark spirit's power. Destroying it had only temporarily weakened it. Now, it was back, and it wanted revenge. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice shaking. "She's at peace now. You can't hurt her anymore." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the room. "You think you've won? This is far from over." The shadows grew darker, creeping across the floor and walls, enveloping the room in an oppressive gloom. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Desperation clawed at me as I searched for a way to fight back. My eyes fell on the locket, the one I had found in the hidden room. It still hung around my neck, a symbol of Emily's presence. I grabbed it, feeling a surge of warmth and strength. "You can't have her," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I won't let you." The spirit recoiled, its form flickering as the locket glowed with an inner light. Emily's spirit appeared beside me, her presence a beacon of hope. "You have to destroy the doll," she whispered, her voice urgent. "It's the source of his power." I nodded, determination flooding through me. With a surge of strength, I grabbed the doll and hurled it into the fireplace. Flames roared to life, consuming the porcelain and lace. The spirit screamed, a sound of pure agony, as its power was severed. The shadows receded, and the oppressive weight lifted from the room. For a moment, everything was still. Then, Emily's spirit turned to me, her expression one of profound gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm free now." She began to fade, her form dissolving into a soft glow. "Live your life. Be happy." With those final words, she disappeared, leaving behind a sense of peace and closure. I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The house was quiet, the malevolent presence gone. The doll was nothing more than ashes, and the dark spirit was vanquished. Emily was finally at peace, and I could feel her gratitude lingering in the air. In the days that followed, the house felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. The whispers were gone, replaced by a comforting silence. I found myself smiling more, the terror of the past weeks slowly fading into memory. I knew that I had done the right thing, helping Emily find peace. But sometimes, late at night, I would feel a chill, a fleeting sensation of being watched. I would tell myself it was just my imagination, the remnants of a traumatic experience. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was never truly gone. The shadows seemed to move just a little too much, and the air felt just a bit too cold. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a familiar sound, the soft, shuffling noise I had heard so many nights before. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to face the doorway. There, on the nightstand, was another doll, identical to the first, its unblinking eyes staring directly at me. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.